On this Sunday after Christmas, I'd like to explore Matthew 2, verses 1 to 12, Herod and the wise men. In the contrast between Herod and the wise men, I see a profound expose of human nature and of human possibility. Can we begin with Herod? And we'll start with a thumbnail sketch. He was an Edomite, so he was of Semitic and Arabic origin. He was not of Jewish descent, but he was a practicing Jew, the family having converted to Judaism some 200 years earlier. Herod's father, Antipater, identified the growing Roman power and supported Pompey in the conquest of Israel. Herod himself was a lifelong friend of Mark Antony. The family's loyalty to Rome resulted in Rome conferring kingship of the whole of Israel on Herod, so his authority as king had nothing to do with any lineal links to David. And Herod, final biographical note, Herod died in 4 BC. Herod was a despot, what today we call a nasty piece of work. He ruled over Judea for 32 years, and during that time he brooked no threat to his power. He even killed his own children if they appeared to threaten his authority. He was a monster, utterly devoted to himself. When the wise men appear asking about one born to be king of the Jews, Herod is determined to find and eliminate the threat posed by the newborn Jesus. I see in Herod a picture of humanity. We all have big egos. The serpent tempted Eve, assuring her that if she ate the forbidden fruit, she would become as God, knowing good and evil, the difference between them. One of the basic drives of men and women is to be their own master. Herod was an extreme example, a despot, an autocrat, wholly committed to himself. But the principle is true of every human. We want to be our own lords. In Luke 19, Jesus tells a parable involving a nobleman who was later appointed to be king. His subjects are dismayed and shout, "We will not have this man to rule over us." Verse 14. That is where most of humanity is. Good people, many of them, but insistent that they run their own lives, be their own master. I don't know how good or bad a job they're making of it. Some do well, others badly. I do know two things. First, no matter how well a person does, they fall short of the best that God intends for them. He is our creator, and no matter that we think we're doing okay without him, we are in fact missing the high mark, the goal that he wants for us. And two, no matter how well or badly a person is doing, they are on a road that leads to hell, to judgment, a bad road. And all because they would not have Jesus rule over them. Now, just one moment. Why is that? I said to refuse to bow our lives to Jesus' lordship leads to hell. That's a big claim. Can I substantiate it? It's easy to see why a person's attitude to Jesus should determine their life in this world. If we become someone's disciple and shape our lives in that person's likeness, they will clearly have a profound effect on us and on the life we live. If we become disciples of a bad person, our lives will turn out bad. But if we base our lives on the teaching of a good and wise person, the effect on us will be wholly positive. And Jesus is the best of men, and his teaching righteous. Whatever else people conclude about Jesus, they tend to agree that he was the best humanity could offer, and that his teaching is wholesome and a solid basis upon which to build one's life. Mahatma Gandhi was not a Christian. In a letter written to Milton Frantz, he said that, in his opinion, Jesus was one of the great teachers of mankind. Now, that's not a confession of faith, but it summarises what most informed men and women conclude about Jesus. So to follow his teachings and his example will have a profound and positive effect on the life of anyone. But why does a person's attitude to Jesus determine their eternal future? The quote in Matthew 2, verse 6, gives us the answer. Herod asks his religious advisors what the Bible, and for him that's the Old Testament, said about Messiah and where Messiah would be born. They replied by quoting Micah chapter 5. But you, O Bethlehem Ephrathah, though you are small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come for me one who will be ruler over Israel. It's the bit the advisors missed out, the bit they didn't tell Herod, that is so interesting. Can I read that quote again? This time I read from Micah 5. But you, O Bethlehem Ephrathah, though you are small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come for me one who will be ruler over Israel, whose origins are from of old, from ancient times. Micah prophesies that Messiah will be born in Bethlehem, but then he adds that his birth is not his beginning. He is from of old, from ancient times, from before time, eternal. In other words, Messiah will be born in Bethlehem, but he will be none other than God come down to this world as a man, God come to live amongst men. And that's why a person's attitude to Jesus determines their eternal future. The Bible claims that he is God, our Creator, and our lawful Lord. And to refuse him is to remain in rebellion against God. To refuse Jesus is proof of our rebellious hearts. We're saying, I will not have this one, I will not have God to rule over me. To refuse Jesus is the ultimate act of rebellion against God. Adam had been given a beautiful place in which to live and perfect health with which to enjoy it. God required only that Adam not eat the fruit of the two trees God had forbidden. And Adam rebelled. Oh, how ungrateful he was. But for us, God has done something far more magnificent. He has given us his Son to rescue us from the curse Adam's sin brought on us. And to say no is the worst thing we can ever do. To refuse this perfect gift, the Son of God, and the life God offers through him. How ungrateful! How wicked! Rightly, our response to Jesus determines our eternal futures. The other characters in Matthew 2 are the wise men, and I turn to them for a moment. They are a contrast to Herod because they are seeking Jesus, and when they find him, they fall at his feet and worship him. Perhaps I ought to say something about the star mentioned in Matthew. There are two possibilities about the star: that it was a natural occurrence, a supernova, or the conjunction of two planets, or it was a supernatural creation of God. Either way, we need to do some debunking. There's no indication from Matthew that the wise men followed the star from Persia, their likely home, to Jerusalem. We're told that the star was created when Messiah was born. The wise men were a cross between a modern astronomer and an astrologer. They were people who studied the heavens, but who saw in the stars divine meaning. And in the appearance of this star, they discerned that a future king of Israel had been born. Determined to celebrate the birth, they set off for Jerusalem, the capital and the place where you would naturally expect to find a future king. They don't appear to have knocked on Herod's door, but on arrival in Jerusalem made widespread inquiries as to where they could find the lately born prince. It was this asking around that brought them to Herod's attention. And we need to do a little more debunking. The children's Christmas play at school has the wise men coming to the stable immediately after the shepherds, and the tableau has shepherds and wise men looking down on the baby Jesus in his manger. In the Bible, we are told that the wise men were alerted about the birth of Jesus when he was born, but their preparation for travel and the journey itself would likely have taken months. When Herod spoke with the wise men, he ascertained from them when the child was born, in other words, when the star appeared, and then set out to kill every male child under the age of 2 years. Jesus could, by the point the wise men visited, be a toddler between 1 or 2 years of age. And the family, they were no longer living in a stable. Matthew says the wise men came to the house. Jesus was no longer a baby lying in a manger. When they arrived where the child was, had Joseph set up business in Bethlehem and the family settled there? When the wise men arrived where the child was and saw the Christ child, we're told that they fell at his feet and worshipped him. That's extraordinary. Before these learned and great men, as I say, is a toddler, and not one dressed in fine clothes or surrounded by the trappings of grandeur. A grubby child who lived in the squalor of a peasant's home, a peasant child. And they fall before him and give him worship. In this child, they see the Lord. When they understood at this stage all that meant, that he was God become man, is not clear. That they had some understanding of his person and work emerges from the gifts they gave: gold for a king, frankincense used by priests to symbolize the prayers of the people, and myrrh used to embalm corpses. This child's greatest work would lie in his death. Whatever their understanding, these wise men knew that the toddler before them was their Lord, and they bowed to him. They submitted themselves to him, adored him. I'm reminded of that moment of ultimate, unreserved, absolute worship that we observe in Revelation chapter 4, verses 9 to 11, where the 24 elders cast their crowns before the throne. Whenever the living creatures give glory, honor, and thanks to him who sits on the throne and who lives forever and ever, the 24 elders fall down before him who sits on the throne and worship him who lives forever and ever. They lay their crowns before the throne and say, "You are worthy, our Lord and God, to receive glory and honor and power, for you created all things, and by your will they were created and have their being." The 24 elders gave themselves in worship and complete submission and adoration, as do the wise men. All that matters to them is that they are before their Lord. What brought them to this point of worship, of adoration, of submission? We should not assume that these wise men, incidentally, there's no evidence that there were only three of them. Three wise men comes from the fact that there were three gifts, and people assumed one gift for each wise man, hence three, but we don't know that. We should not assume that these wise men were naturally spiritual people. I sometimes hear that some people are more disposed to being religious than others, that it's in their nature, in their DNA, or something in their background, their upbringing, that makes them open to religious things. Not so. The picture the Bible paints of humanity is complex but profound. It teaches that every man and every woman is made in God's image. We're told this in Genesis 1, verse 23. It's the very first thing the Bible tells us about human beings. Because humans are made in God's image, they're capable of knowing him, of having a relationship with him, and capable too of imitating him. It means that every person is capable of great goodness and kindness. Many charities have no connection to Christianity, and they're wholly secular, and yet full of compassion for the weak. Compassion is not the sole preserve of the followers of Jesus. In the first lockdown, I was greatly moved by a letter shoved through my letterbox. Because I, and hence Marjorie too, were and still are meant to be shielding, and that meant we weren't able to go to the supermarket for ourselves. Neighbours were offering to shop for us. That was so kind. They didn't profess faith on Jesus, but they had compassion in their hearts. Blackburn, Lancashire, has some of the highest levels of child deprivation and poverty in the UK. I saw on the BBC News last week that some good people have opened a centre and invited the people of Blackburn to donate toys. And these are sent to homes where the children would otherwise receive nothing this Christmas. There's no link to any church, just a concern for those in need. Yet, good as they can be, people are, the Bible tells us, sinful. All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Romans 3, verse 23. If the first thing the Bible says about men and women is that we're made in God's image, Genesis 1, the second thing is told in the very next chapter, Genesis 2. And it's this, that men and women rebelled against God. The incident of Adam, Eve, and the serpent. And that when Adam ate the fruit of the tree which God said they should not eat, every man and every woman from that time to this were separated from God. The Bible calls this sin. All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. The theologian and pastor John Calvin has a helpful picture that will assist us to grasp the balance between these two statements about humanity. And it will help us, I think, to understand the difference between Herod and the wise men. Calvin asks us to imagine a statue. It's made in the image of someone or something. In the statue, we see a reflection of the real person or the thing that is represented. We are made in the image of God. But then Calvin asks us to imagine taking a knife to the image and slashing it to the statue and defacing it. The likeness might remain, but it's marred. That is what humanity has done to itself. We were made in the image of God, but have taken a knife to that image and defaced it. Humanity did this first through Adam's rebellion, but each person adds to the defilement by our own personal acts of rebellion and selfishness. The result is people made in God's image, capable of goodness, but imperfect, a shadow of what they were meant to be. And some are more defaced than others. They've allowed themselves to slash God's image more, giving themselves to unreserved wickedness, making God's original creation almost unrecognizable. They are harder, more cruel and selfish. But however much we've slashed the image, a little or a lot, we all, to a greater or lesser degree, are defaced. All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. And sin, even a minute amount, makes us selfish. We want to be our own masters. We are incapable of submitting to God. The wise men were defaced, incapable of submitting to God. But God acted. That's what the star is all about. He awoke them. The Apostle Paul discusses this in his letter to the Colossians. He says, "You were dead in your trespasses and sins." Dead. Strong words. But God made you alive. Paul says that God brought the Colossians to life by opening their eyes to recognize Jesus as Lord and opening their hearts to accept him, Colossians 2, verse 13. The language he uses is dramatic, dead, alive. That is what the appearance of the star is all about. God awakening the wise men. Can I apply all this to ourselves? Where are you now? Or better, what are you now? A Herod or a wise man? For some of you, you know that there was a time when you would not have Jesus rule over you. You insisted that you be your own master. Perhaps you knew something about Jesus, but it was all in your head. Then he awoke you. You recognized that he was real. You realized that you had broken God's law and were facing God's anger. But you knew too that Jesus had died so that you could be forgiven. The coming and life and death of Jesus was God's love gift to you. And perhaps you were alarmed and you refused the gift. You would not have this one rule over you. But God spoke to you again. Perhaps he spoke to you a number of times. And you were awoken and drawn to him. At the last, you bowed the knee. You opened your heart. You took him to be your Saviour and Master. But there might be one person watching this video or reading this sermon in the privacy of your own home, and you know that you are still refusing to allow Jesus to rule over you. You are loath to call yourself a Herod. You feel you are better than that, but like him, you refuse to allow Jesus to be Lord of your life. Perhaps you say, well, it's too late for me now. I disagree. Can this Christmas of 2020 be the year your life and your eternity is transformed? I believe it can. You're in the privacy of your own home, but you're not alone. Jesus stands before you as he stood before the wise men. Will you open the eyes of faith to see him? The wise men gave him their hearts. Will you? And as I always close these sermons, if God has spoken to you and there's something here that you want to discuss at greater length, pick up the phone. We want to talk to you. God bless you. God bless each of us this Christmas.